Daggerheart's latest expansion is here, and with it comes 4 new classes, a bunch of ancestries and communities, campaign frames, adversaries, and environments. But in this video, we'll be focusing on one of the newest classes added to Daggerheart, the Assassin. Let's begin with their class features, starting with Marked for Death. On a successful weapon attack, you can mark a stress to make the target marked for death. When you deal damage to the target you have marked, add a number of d4s equal to your tier to the damage roll. You can only have one adversary marked for death at a time. This condition lasts until you take a rest, the current adversary marked for death is defeated, or the GM spends a number of fear equal to your tier to clear it. It's a decent ability that does obviously give a damage boost to all assassins, despite subclass, which is good against when you're fighting one target, but does struggle when you're fighting multiple targets. And the d4s, even with a max of 4 of them at tier 4, isn't going to be a massive damage boost, but each subclass will solve one of these problems. But before that, let's talk about their next feature, Get In and Get Out. Spend a hope to ask the GM for a quick or inconspicuous way into or out of the place you can see. The next roll you make that acts on this information has advantage. This is just a neat exploration ability that is handy to have when stealthing into a location, or if you need a quick getaway. Just spend a hope and ask God, the GM, for the answer. It's a groundbreaking, but still a fun ability to have. Lastly, their hope feature, Deadly Determination. Spend 3 hope to clear 2 stress. A very simple ability and just an easy way to clear stress, which is especially useful since Marked for Death, along with other abilities, require stress. So it will overall just always come in handy. Now let's talk subclasses, which the Assassin gets 2, Executioner's Guild and Poisoner's Guild. Let's start with Executioners, which are all about dealing more damage and killing adversaries much more quickly than their contemporaries. For their first foundation feature, they get First Strike. The first time in a scene you succeed on an attack, you'll deal double damage. Just a great ability that lives up to the fantasy of an assassin, and being able to strike down your opponent in one blow. Or at the very least, deal massive amounts of damage. Literally, if you double the enemy's severe threshold. Next up, they get Ambush. Your Marked for Death feature uses d6s instead of d4s. So this is what I was referring to earlier, since Executioner fixes one of the issues of the base Assassin, and increases the damage of Marked for Death to a d6, which now makes the Assassin much deadlier throughout the entire campaign, and overall scales much nicer than d4s. For their specialization, they get Death Strike. When you deal severe damage to a creature, you can mark a stress to force them to mark an additional hit point. Now this can get pretty fun, since now not only you can deal 4 HP in a turn, which depending on the enemy could fully take him out, but if your GM is playing with massive damage, then with First Strike, along with if you crit, or if you have other means of doubling past that severe threshold, you can mark 5 HP off of an enemy, which is more than most classes can accomplish on their own. The next feature they get at this tier is Scorpion's Poise. You gain a +2 to your evasion against attacks made by a creature you have marked for death. A simple feature, but is very useful to be extra hard to hit, fighting your target, ensuring that you will strike the final blow against them. For Mastery, they first get True Strike. Once per long rest, when you fail an attack, you can spend a hope to make it a success instead. A very good ability that obviously just guarantees a hit against the target, which in turn, they can then deal massive amounts of damage against them. Lastly, they get Backstab. Your Marked for Death feature uses d8s instead of d6s. Again, incredibly simple, but is obviously a very nice improvement, taking the Executioner's marked average damage up from 10 to 18, which, stacking your regular damage on top of that, makes the Executioner a top-tier choice if you want to deal tons of damage. The next subclass option they have is the Poisoner's Guild, which is all about, as the name suggests, using poisons to debilitate your foes. For their foundation, they get Toxic Concoctions. Mark a stress to place 1d4+1 tokens on this card. When you make a successful weapon attack, you can spend a token to inflict the target with a poison. You know these poisons. Ghost Petal. The target becomes temporarily vulnerable. Grave Spore. The target must also mark a stress. And Leechweed. You deal an extra 1d6 of damage on this attack. When you take a long rest, clear all unspent tokens. So before we get into the specifics of this feature, I can now speak on what this subclass particularly fixes that the other couldn't, which is now the Assassin can affect multiple targets at once, not having to just focus down on just one enemy. But the specific toxins here are all pretty solid, with options for extra damage and making them stressed, but by far the more powerful option is Ghost Petal, since it makes the target vulnerable, which means the party gets advantage on all rolls against them. Granted, the GM could spend a fear to undo it, but even then, that's a very valuable resource for the GM to have, so having them having to spend a fear to clear the condition is still very useful to do. Next, for the specialization, they get Poison Compendium. You also know these poisons. Midnight Vine. The target has disadvantage on attack rolls until it marks a stress to clear this condition. And Gorgon Root. The target becomes temporarily restrained. Both very solid options to the poison repertoire, with Gorgon Root being able to restrain and stop the movement of an adversary, which, if they are hypermobile, can be very handy to use, but I think Midnight Vine between the two is more applicable, giving the target disadvantage on attacks, which is obviously just much more generally useful than restraining the target. And even if they mark a stress to clear the condition, that brings them one step closer to stressing them out, thus making them vulnerable. Next they get is Twin Fang. When you inflict a target marked for death with a poison you know, you can spend an additional token to also inflict the effect of a second poison you know. So this ability is a nice upgrade to your other poisons, since now if you mark someone, you can now stack poisons on them. For example, you could do Vine and Spore to mark a stress and give them disadvantage unless they mark a stress, effectively having them mark 2 stress. For their mastery features, they first get Venomancer. You know these poisons. Blight Seed. Target gains a -3 penalty to their damage thresholds until the end of the scene. This effect cannot stack. Fear Leaf. You deal extra damage equal to the result of your fear die on this attack. And Corpse Thorn. The target gains disadvantage on reaction rolls until the end of the scene. These poisons, like all the others, are all very solid, and honestly the only technically weakest one is Corpse Thorn, but even then, if you got a wizard or bard casting Fireball, yes, the bard in Daggerheart can cast Fireball, and the adversary has to roll a reaction roll, you can make their life a whole lot harder. The other 2 options are also very solid, with Blight making major and severe thresholds much easier to accomplish, or Fear Leaf just being able to stack damage even higher, with basically adding a d12 to the damage. Lastly, they get Adder's Blessing. You are immune to poisons and other toxins. Even though it's thematically appropriate and it's not like it's not useful, there's just not many adversaries or environments that use poison or toxins to take advantage of this feature, which makes this capstone sadly a very niche ability. So that is the Assassin in Daggerheart. Overall, a pretty good class if you want to play a character who deals massive amounts of damage on a turn, or if you want to play a poison-based character to debilitate your foes, which it accomplishes both with flying colors. If you enjoyed this video, why not leave a like and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Daggerheart. Bye for now.